thought I'd just start with a quick introduction in terms of why I thought this panel and the discussion is quite interesting for us, because as Craig said, diversity and inclusion is pretty much in my DNA, and intersectionality in particular is really important because diversity usually is through the lens of gender, and that's where most companies tend to focus. And what we've done in Ordelis and Outstanding, Empower and Heroes is try to widen the debate, not away from gender, but to encourage chairmen and CEOs to think wider than women. Because LGBT, lesbian, gay, bisexual, trans, because a lot of people don't know what LGBT means, ethnicity is also diversity. And from an intersectionality perspective, not many people like the word, first and foremost, which is why I think we've got a slightly different subject topic, because intersectionality doesn't sound very sexy. But intersectionality from my perspective is personal, because I tick many boxes myself. So I'm British, I was born here. I'm Indian, I'm Sikh, I'm a middle child, which is probably why I'm an overachiever, so my parents will notice me, and I'm gay. And the most disturbing thing about me probably is I'm from Derby. So everyone thinks I'm from London. But it means I have many different layers about me and my identity and my characteristics. And if I think about the work we do in Outstanding, which focuses on LGBT, which is where we began, I probably identify more as LGBT than I do Indian, which, if you think about it, that's quite weird and unusual, because it shouldn't be one over the other, which is why we then set up Empower, which looks at ethnic minorities. So I hope that we have a really fruitful conversation today.
I guess I'm in two worlds, academia and business, and with my academic colleagues, I always take the mick. They're in their ivory tower, talking about intersectionality, whereas I'm dealing with the HR director who's like, have you got me the memo yet for the meeting at 2 o'clock this afternoon? So it's very different. But similarly, if we're in business and we're ignoring academic research, then what's the point? So I'm kind of trying to bridge both. And so I'm with John in the sense that I think we shouldn't let labels and terms get in the way of important stuff, and intersectionality could be such a word. So I think that is definitely one. The second thing, though, is, for me, organisations trying to do diversity inclusion are in three buckets. The first bucket is what I call diversity 101. So you've got organisations doing this stuff basically because they have to. Because there's gender pay reporting happening, there's race discrimination legislation, there's the Equality Act, and they've got to do something. And it's not to say that compliance isn't important, but it's insufficient. There's a bunch of organisations doing what I call diversity 2.0, or kind of marketing-led, stakeholder-led stuff, which again is important. It's got to communicate and so forth. But you know, if I read another FTSE 100 annual report talking about how important diversity is for them, when I know that internally there's a long way to go, it's just not genuine, right? And then there's a third bucket, which I think is where intersectionality comes into, which is basically dealing with individual people as decision makers. And I don't think many organisations are there yet. I think we're still in compliance or in marketing. To get to this third area, I think it is difficult. One, because it's hard to kind of get your head around some of this stuff. But two, we've kind of got legacy issues with these areas. So we've kind of invented race equality schemes, we've invented, you know, women's leadership programs, and we've done all these things. And that's hard to suddenly change or even stop.
I worked at Time Warner before, and back in 2005 I set up an LGBT network, and it was the first LGBT network to be set up in kind of a media organisation. And I remember there was about 250 members, and I also remember 25% roughly were straight. And frankly, it worked because it was inclusive. And so that was back in 2005. Roll forward to 2017 now, 12 years on, HarperCollins, we've got 1,000 people in the UK. We're a SME, I would say. We're not a FTSE with thousands of employees. And 3 years ago, one employee came up to me and said, I'd love to set up a diversity group. How do I go about doing it? So we got together. There was a few other people that started to get interested. And basically, 3 years on, last year, or this year, just gone, we won Best Diversity Network Group in the UK for the private sector, beating all these FTSE companies with huge budgets and whatever else. And what we have is not different genres of diversity. We have one group called HarperCollins All In. It covers every form of diversity. It's intersectionality all over it without me knowing the word. And basically they're totally involved in the organisation from, you know, everything we do is totally aligned to our strategy. And I know every HR person in this room will get that. But frankly, if your diversity network group isn't, it's just not going to work. So we've now got about 10% of the company that are actively engaged in it. They have a space on our intranet, they acquire books. In fact, I shouldn't overdo this, they were completely involved in the acquisition of this book and are involved in marketing it. So they're completely involved in what we do. They have changed our freelance guidelines, they've changed our cover design, they've educated people in the organisation. The key thing they've done, and I'm not going to harp on about it, but they've really changed our culture, because I've got a CEO, thanks to Stephen, who's helped me on this journey, who gets diversity. I've got an exec team that get diversity, but what I've really got, and I've got zero money, frankly, but what we do have is hearts and minds, and 1,000 people get it and they want to be part of it, and that is more important than any budget of any FTSE company.
To your point there, I think on the groups, it's one of the things we've been trying really hard to do is to get a real feeling of inclusivity. I can't even say it myself, but across the piece. And one of the things that people do get in little groups, one of the things we found that's brought people together is everybody gets the commercial thing, you know, but actually if you do try and mirror the customer and start from where the customers are, because some customers will feel that when they're talking about particular stages of their life, it's helpful to have somebody on the end of the phone or talking to them who can understand some of that. And if we can mirror our customer base, by definition, we're going to be inclusive, and that will help. That helps. So we try and do it like that to get the groups supporting that agenda. But back at bathrooms, I think for intersectionality for us has been around trying, and we wouldn't have labelled it that either, but about trying to do lots of little things. I think the 1.0 that you were talking about there is because people do big programs, big women in leadership, big, you know, and in South Africa so much was big programs that people were going to drive, government sponsored, builds a level of cynicism. So we've done gender neutral toilets, and actually there's a small group of people that think that's a really bad thing to do for all sorts of reasons that I don't think I'll get into just before we start on snacks. but there is but actually it takes a lot of angst. It's also quite interesting. In years and years of being at leadership events, as I started to get promoted, and one of the benefits was always there was a queue for the men's and not a queue for the ladies, which is so different to any cinema you're ever in or anything like that. So, but now we're gender neutral, so everybody's got the same space, and it's a nice washroom with all the bits in it, and it's good on so many different ways. But we get complaints, right? Not everybody thinks that's a good idea. So if in recruitment and selection, if you can attack that through training and through all sorts of really great interventions we have now that we didn't have even quite recently. I think if you can attack the unconscious bias, then a lot of the other things solve themselves. And what I found certainly in South Africa, if you could get people to sit in a room and have an interview with someone, having taken their name off the CV, the chances are they've got a much better chance of getting the job, particularly if afterwards you do a quite forensic wash-up, not just, well, I met Suki and didn't really like him, or I thought, you know, whatever. If you have an actual conversation about someone's skills and abilities. So get your processes really clear and fair and minimise the unintentional biases in there. But actually, if you can attack the root cause, in my experience, and then do obvious things, but people start with the tactical and don't try and solve the root. I think it's back to looking at making the organisation feel inclusive. So don't focus on the differences, focus on getting everybody to feel they can be themselves at work. And I think that's really important. And one of the things that was said to me a long time ago, very, very early on before many of us talked about these things, was everybody's a minority in some way. And I think that's really helpful. And if you think about it like that, I'm a minority because I'm shy or whatever it is, I think if you can just think about how do we make it more inclusive rather than worrying about the different groups.
Thank you very much. That was very informative. And How would you go about changing the culture because of the country, if you like? Because although it's great to sit in the city, the vast majority of employees and employers are SMEs and much smaller than the SME that's hard up point. So if we really want to do the job,
I'm personally passionate about it, but frankly, it wouldn't have worked even with just that. It only works because people are interested in it, and when you get a swell of people that are interested in it, it helps even more. And I personally believe every CEO you work for will be really interested in what your people think about diversity and inclusion. And that opinion is more important than any HR director's opinion or any other exec's opinion, because they count and they're the people that make your business. So if you can get that kind of feedback upwards, I think it would make a big impact.
I think also with an SME, because we talked about this critical mass, if you're a smaller business, you're not necessarily going to have lots of LGBT leaders or women or ethnic minorities. So the key thing in terms of what John mentioned is with diversity, it should rise above competition. So you should be kind of building networks with other SMEs that you can connect with to try and share resources, because you're all trying to hopefully achieve the same purpose. So I think it's really important to work with organisations, maybe regionally, that can support those different communities. And this is the point of intersectionality. An SME would benefit from it far more, because hopefully, even if there's only 2 people and that's your only woman and only LGBT leader, you should be bringing them together to try and work towards a more inclusive environment. That's the biggest advice I would give for an SME.
Do you still think there's a role for metrics, thinking about making it personal, or do you think that's very much 1.1?
A simple thing is, you just change the IT that you can tick as many boxes as you want, right? So you can cut the data in different ways. And what you find is that it's not just a gender pay gap, it's even more for ethnic minority women. Or it's not just, and you get the intersectionality in data form. And particularly when you want to engage some of the guys or people who just don't get it, when they see that, they're like, oh. And then think about it like with your question, so about like SMEs. If you thought about your customers and how you want to like target your customers and clients and get, well, think about doing what you do with them internally. So what we've done now is, yes, representation is massively important, and tick multiple boxes and cut it to show that in the pipeline and stuff. But also inclusion is really important. So we've developed an inclusion diagnostic where you ask people a series of questions, and then you can cut it by the diversity to show actually that, for example, how safe do people feel speaking up, right? It's great to have a diverse team around you, but it's useless if they don't feel empowered to contribute their ideas, right? I mean, I walk into a boardroom and I'm intimidated, but sure as hell lots of people feel even more intimidated. So it's great to have the diversity, but if they can't do that, then what's the point? So you can actually measure the level of psychological safety or ability to speak up for minority groups too. So yes, you still need the data, but do it for inclusion as well as diversity.
My question is more around, so what you were saying about recruitment, complete valid point, but then at the same time, in entry-level graduate positions, it is 50-50 for men and women, for example. But the biggest problem is in the first promotion, and obviously that's the biggest gap. So what do you recommend companies to do, whether it's manager training or whatever, but what do you recommend to remove that unconscious bias?
And I think, like a lot of things in life, it's about the maths. Because when you get a really diverse pool, back to my 600 CVs, the thing will work itself out if you can depersonalise it. And I think it's back to having a really robust process. So nobody should be making a decision on their own, not even if there's someone that's always right. So all promotion decisions should be made very open. Because the other thing back to the conversation about metrics, it gets things out there. If you get decisions open to scrutiny with like-minded people, you've got a much better chance of getting a right decision. And then if you start saying, actually, everybody we've promoted in the last however long has been like this or like that, then you can hold it up. So I think it's about being really transparent about what you're doing and using every opportunity to take away the opportunity for people to sort of consciously or unconsciously bias it. And one of the things I think is nobody wants tokenism, but one of the things I've learned definitely is when you get an undiverse shortlist, and however that is, and I often see shortlists for HR roles and there's no men on it, and you go, if you've got an undiverse shortlist, that you haven't done a good job. If you're looking at a group of promotions and they're all of a particular group, you haven't done a good job, send it back.
Before we break, I've just got a few dates for your diary. We actually have 3 events coming up before the end of the year, so lots to do between now and Christmas. First of all, October the 12th, we have an event which is sponsored by Cielo, our recruitment sponsor. And basically, we're going to be talking about talent acquisition strategy. For those more old-fashioned, maybe recruitment strategy. And we have Cielo plus 3 senior HR people speaking on the panel, so I'm sure it'll be a great event. I'm very pleased to announce on November the 14th we've secured Giulio Bruno as a speaker. Giulio is the Chief Executive of Time Out. Thank you to Nikki. And Giulio is going to be talking about digital leadership, so that should be a really interesting session on November the 14th. Then finally, we have a Christmas event on December the 7th. Not sure what we're doing yet, but we have a very interesting and funny and funky venue, so watch this space.